So I was talking to someone this morning about WooCommerce, right, and hosting WooCommerce. And their first question was, well, what goes into hosting it, right? If WooCommerce is just a plugin and a plugin sits on top of WordPress, can't you host WooCommerce on any host, managed or unmanaged, that supports WordPress? And the answer is, of course you can, without question. You can totally put WooCommerce anywhere that you can put WordPress. Should you? Well, that's a whole different question. There's a whole bunch of shared hosting out there that would allow you to put WordPress on, and they've been doing it forever. And the model of that was because, frankly, you didn't need a lot of complexity to host WordPress if all you were doing was running a blog, right? Especially a low traffic blog. If you're hosting, pictures of your family or your pet, if you're writing every now and then about your visits to restaurants, not only was there not a lot of taxing on the system, right? They could put you on high density shared servers and fill up those servers with a whole bunch of customers running WordPress. But on top of that, most hosts would put some sort of caching in place that would enhance the performance of their servers so that you didn't even hit the database all that often. And frankly, if you weren't changing your content a lot, no big deal. So in that dynamic, you go, well, this is great. I can install WordPress anywhere, so I can probably install WooCommerce everywhere. Well, WooCommerce is totally different. WooCommerce is not one of those things where you write a post and then leave it there and it can get cached and then people just kind of look at it or not and be done with it, right? WooCommerce is a high transaction dynamic. WooCommerce is an online store where people are coming and they're interacting and they are hitting that database a lot. And so you go, well, okay, so what does this mean? Well, it means that you ought to look at your host again and you ought to figure out, many hosts have an actual set of plans for more high trafficked, more in demand, more transactional based software. So you get in this place where you start having a different conversation. Now, with that different conversation is going to likely come a different price point, and you should be aware of that. But there are a lot of players out there, including a lot of managed WordPress hosts. And some folks will say, you don't need managed at all, right? Skip it. You don't need managed. And they're right. You don't need managed. You can totally manage the server yourself, right? Most of the people who say you don't need managed are the kind of people who can manage the server on their own. So if you're into that, right? If you're kind of like on the weekends I put on my DevOps hat and I want to manage my own server, right? By all means, you totally can, right? Go to a DigitalOcean, go to an AWS, spin up some services, connect the dots, and run your own server. And it will be very inexpensive from a monetary perspective. But you'll pay, right? You'll just pay with your own time, your own energy, your own effort. And not just the effort to tweak or adjust a server. It'll also be the effort to learn what you need to learn, right? If there are things you don't know about managing that server, which is why the managed services becomes useful. Because essentially you're trading the payment there to an actual monetary dynamic where you're saying, I'm willing to pay someone so that they do the learning, they do the management, they do the processing, they do the tweaking, and I don't have to at all. I just run the store. So when it comes to hosting a WooCommerce site, I just want you to know those $1, $3, $5, even $10 plans that are really meant for hosting WordPress may not be the best solution for you. There are several players out there who do manage WordPress, and you can have a good conversation with them, right? Talk to them about, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's how much activity my store is having. And when you get into that, when you start looking at hosting WooCommerce, you're going to realize, wow, I need to think through the database. I need to think through the infrastructure. I need to think through, do I need a load balancer and multiple web heads? And I want to get that stuff in place early because I don't want to be in a place where my site goes down and then engineers start talking to me about how to scale my solution. And then you want to start thinking about what kinds of plugins I'm using. Just because you bought a plugin, just because there's a WooCommerce extension for it, doesn't mean it's code that you're going to say, wow, this is really high quality code and it's going to do great in terms of a high performance dynamic. I'll tell you in our history, right, when I worked at an agency called Crowd Favorite, more often than not, a big part of what we did as services was look at the code other people had bought, right? Straight off this, you go to a website and you're like, look, it says WooCommerce and QuickBooks, or WooCommerce and, Zapier, or WooCommerce and whatever, right? And you're like, okay, we still need to look at that code, right? To make sure that that's not going to be a performance hiccup. So getting a partner, right? Getting a digital agency. We have a prospect right now over at Liquid Web who's working with web dev studios, right? And a lot of what they do is not only create custom plugins, right? But evaluate the rest of the code to make sure that it's going to be a high performance code. And then you get into connections to Elasticsearch, for example, right? And the ability to improve query performance because you're using another solution called Elasticsearch. So you go to your host, and when you start talking to your host to host a WooCommerce site, you start realizing, I want to ask about, do you have a particular preference over certain plugins? Are there certain plugins that you're not allowing? What's going on with database or load balancers? Do you have an integration for Elasticsearch? There's a whole lot that goes into hosting WooCommerce. It is not as simple as saying, anywhere that I can host WordPress, I can host WooCommerce. Hope that helps.